We now come to the two motions on the welfare cap, which will be debated together. I call the Minister to move the first motion. Minister Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move the motion in the name of the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, before this government was elected, we said that we would change this country, and we will. To get change done, any government has to stand on firm foundations. And that's why, as we just heard from the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, we promised to be responsible with the public's money. And we know in this mission, every single penny counts. Because if you fail to protect the public purse, you fail to protect the purses of the public. Family finances cannot ever withstand fantasy economics. And that was supposed to be the whole point of the welfare cap. It was designed to help better control public spending, counting the cost of the rising price of failure. And I'll come in my contribution, Madam Deputy Speaker, to some of the failures that we are seeing at the moment. Seeing people thrown on the scrap heap as a result of the failure of 14 years in economic policy, particularly as it relates to the labour market. So the welfare cap was intended to ensure that the costs of important parts of the social security system, such as universal credit, though not counting those actively looking for work, personal independence payments and pension credit, remained predictable and affordable. As I said, only state pension and benefits for unemployed households were excluded. So what was the result of a decade of the existence of the Conservative welfare caps? The result of that was repeated breaches of this cap of ever higher limits. And we now see the latest cap to be on course to be breached by an £8.6 billion overspend. This is really not a tolerable level given the state of our economy and the public finances. But worse still, Madam Deputy Speaker, there is the human cost for every single person who could be enjoying the benefits of work but has been denied the choices and chances they deserve. And I meet people regularly who are in this position. The young person not recovered from the dreadful pandemic legacy, not in college, not starting their first job, barely even at times to go out with friends, and bearing the burden of the mental ill health crisis that our young people are facing. The pandemic generation, who I believe were just completely let down. Or older relatives of us all, pushed out of work before their time, with hip pain or knee pain, the NHS at the moment just not able to help, and not even getting any advice about how to make ends meet. That's the legacy we've inherited, and that is not good enough for anybody. It's also the legacy of low growth, the higher cost of living, and high inactivity, with employment and social security systems ill-equipped to meet the requirements of an older, sicker nation. That, Madam Deputy Speaker, is the record of the party opposite. Now, unfortunately, this breach, forecast as far back as March 2023, but ignored, is now wholly unavoidable in this fiscal year, given the scale of failure that we have inherited. We will not duck difficult decisions needed to restore economic stability, and we will deal with the failure we see before us. But before I turn to how we will do that, I want to reflect on exactly how it is that we've ended up in the situation that we face today. As I said, the sad truth is in way too many parts of the country, too many people are denied the opportunity of a good job so that they can support themselves and put a roof over the head of their family. And the benefits bill only reflects this failure. With 2.8 million people locked out of the workforce due to poor health, and 3.4 million more working age people reporting a long-term health condition than 10 years ago,
Will my honourable friend give way?
We have large numbers of people turning up to a security system that is not geared up to meet what has become the greatest unemployment challenge of a generation. I give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. I think she's doing a very compelling job of setting out the quite damning state of the welfare system we inherited when we took charge. Would she agree with me that fundamental to making sure we're providing people with the support needed to get back to work is that investment into the NHS so that people will finally have the healthcare support they need to be able to get back into work, to contribute in the way they'd like to and to build that secure future for themselves and their family?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for that intervention. The NHS is the absolute bedrock of making sure that people can thrive and can contribute to society, both economically and in every other way. We also need to make sure that that health support people get is the right support. And at the moment, we're not doing enough on occupational therapies and other things so that people have got health support that's tailored to their work. And we'll have more to say about that in the near future, I am sure. So as I've said, we have a huge number of people turning up to a social security system that is not geared up to meet this huge employment challenge. Social security at the moment cannot cope. Now, you might ask yourselves how on earth we got to this place after 14 years of so-called benefits crackdowns from the members opposite. Well, I would invite anybody to look at their actual record. When universal credit was introduced 12 years ago, the government of the day made all sorts of promises. They said it would, and I quote, break the cycle of benefit dependency and offer, again I quote, greater incentives to find a job. The former Secretary of State, the Right Honourable Member for Chingford and Woodford Green, said that universal credit would ensure that work always pays and is seen to pay. But what have we actually seen since? A disastrous series of wrong-headed choices which have achieved precisely the opposite effect. And in new data we are publishing today for the very first time, we show the extent of the effect of universal credit itself on incapacity benefits. Of an 800,000 increase in those receiving incapacity benefits between 2018 to 2023, around 10% is due to the rising state pension age, and another 10% because of the way changes were made in the move from employment support allowance and other benefits to universal credit. A situation that should have absolutely been foreseen and planned for by the previous government, which then leaves an increase of over 500,000 to which I will now turn. And this really is where the party opposite needs to take a long, hard look at the changes they made to universal credit. Consider how people transition between the looking for work group in universal credit health journey, where people are told they have limited capacity to do any work or work-related activity. Consider how people move between those two groups, where you're told you can't work and where you're actively looking for work. People between those two groups who were on their way to looking for work used to receive a top-up to their benefit. Yet that top-up was removed in 2017, creating a very hard barrier between those categorised as incapable for work and those looking for work. Add to that a 4-year freeze to the rates of universal credit in the late 2010s, except for the highest tier of health-related benefits. The result of this was to squeeze the incomes of those trying to find work and hardening the barrier between those on universal credit actively looking for work and those who've been told that they were unable to work. Then we've seen the steady rise in the number of people on the highest tier of health benefits where there are no requirements to look for work or to get any help to make the steps on that journey. No support to find jobs when many actually want to work. And all the while, more and more conditions and box ticking and a system that has failed. Now, social security was designed to smooth people's incomes over time and to take account of life events that could happen to any of us. But the result of all of this, by the previous government, by design or mismanagement, and probably both, created a social security system that would segregate people away from work and forget about them. No help, no hand back to work, only the promise that you would be left alone. The Office for Budget Responsibility has said the wider benefits system, in particular the conditionality and generosity associated with incapacity benefits relative to other parts of the system, has affected incapacity benefits flow over time. Now, unfortunately, this situation created by the last government is far from the only problem, because social security will only ever function where the government takes seriously its wider duties. I'll let the member intervene before I come to him.
I'm most grateful to her. On the point of support for people who are on benefits, the 1986 Social Security Act ended the requirement of the now DWP to provide advice and welfare support to people. Is it now going to be the policy of the DWP that they will automatically offer advice and support to people on the benefits they're entitled to claim, or to give more support to voluntary advice agencies so that people do get what they're entitled to?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the gentleman for his intervention. We published in November an extensive reform programme for the department to get Britain working. And we showed how in some parts of the country, and I'll come to this in more detail shortly, in some parts of the country, people have been abandoned and their labour market has not supported enough good jobs for a very long time. And we showed how by acting on better health and better local support services, we will reintroduce ambition into our support services. We want to help people get into a job that is going to support their family finances and help our economy thrive. And we have a huge change programme underway in the Department for Work and Pensions, and we will be doing even more than we set out in that white paper, because the challenge of this is huge, but the potential is also massive. At the moment, particularly, I worry about everybody who's out of work, but particularly our young people who have effectively been thrown on the scrap heap. It is a disaster now in exactly the same way as the disaster that was brought about in the economic turbulence that I grew up in the 1980s, in the period that he refers to. So we will take the challenge of restoring employment, proper employment, in this country, Madam Deputy Speaker, extremely seriously. Now, I want to, in doing that, talk about the government's wider responsibilities, not just in reforming the social security system, but much further. And you'll forgive me, Madam Deputy Speaker, if I return to the founding document of our social security system, the Beveridge Report. Because in 1942, William Beveridge identified the establishment of comprehensive health and rehabilitation services and the maintenance of employment as necessary conditions of success in social security. That is a lesson that is forgotten again and again in this country, that you will never have a social security system that functions well unless you have an NHS that is working and the maintenance of policies designed towards full employment. Social security cannot soak up every single problem in this country if the government forgets its wider responsibilities. I note that the Beveridge Report was considering the consequences of war and the injury to the nation that that had brought about. And in many ways, I think we ought to learn the lessons of the pandemic, that the health of the nation can never be taken for granted, and that in setting us on the right path in both health and employment, we can plot a course towards a more sustainable future. As I've said, is it any wonder really that our social security system is broken, given the health of the nation, given what we've been through, and given the last government's neglect of the NHS and the state of our labour market? Now, again, to look backwards for a moment, we know that in our country's economic history, we had whole towns and cities during periods being deindustrialised and left to fend for themselves. Economies simply failed. And whilst great progress has been made, including in my own constituency, in my own city region, in Merseyside and other places where our economies have moved on greatly since that time, sadly, too many have still never properly recovered. And as a result, we have a labour market which simply fails to offer good work everywhere. As part of our Get Britain Working white paper analysis, we found that when you don't count students, the inactivity rate, just to give one example, in Blackpool is 29%, nearly a third of working age people. You know, that can never be a good platform on which to build a thriving economy. And I am determined, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we will turn it around. More than half of the 20 local authorities with the highest rates of inactivity in England are in the north, whilst none are in the southeast. Now, it is far from a north-south divide here, and we've identified 14 types of labour markets in the United Kingdom and considered their features, what they share, what divides them. And we want to identify those places that are furthest behind precisely so that we can help. But it's not just the prevailing economic circumstances or what's happened in the recent past to your local economy that often defeats people. Unfortunately, it's also the job centres that are supposed to be there to help. And again, when we did our analysis for our Get Britain Working white paper, we uncovered the record of the last Conservative government. And I was shocked to find that only around 8% of universal credit claimants in the Searching for Work group move into work from 1 month to the next. Only 8%. And in the no work requirements group, 92% of people put in that group were still there after 6 months. That is the very definition of being on the scrap heap. No work and no help to get work either. That is just failing people. And then there's the price tag. With spending on universal credit and disability benefits 10.9 billion higher than anticipated when the level of the welfare cap was calculated. That is a dreadful record. For the reasons I set out earlier, the breach of the cap is unavoidable this year. But this government is taking the action necessary to drive up opportunity and employment whilst driving down the benefits bill. Our Get Britain Working white paper, as I've mentioned, set out the biggest reforms to employment in a generation with a radical new approach backed by £240 million of investment. We are overhauling our job centres and creating a new jobs and careers service, doing away with needless admin and freeing up work coach time so that my colleagues can give people real high quality support. And I would say, Madam Deputy Speaker, with my disappointment in the help that people often receive in job centres, I am absolutely never disappointed by our work coaches. The thing that lets them down is the system that they work within. Being told you can only see somebody for 10 minutes. How are you supposed to help in 10 minutes? Having to do numerous admin checks that could be done with modern technology when the person in front of you is sat there just waiting, not receiving any help. Whereas our work coaches are full of ideas, they're full of local knowledge, and they're full of determination that we will make a new system work. So I just take this opportunity to put on record my thanks to every single DWP member of staff who has embraced change with gusto.
I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way. I visited the job centre in St Albans in my constituency last year, and I too was struck by the fantastic support given by some of the work coaches. But I was also very struck by speaking to some of the job seekers there, one of whom said that she had been in full employment, but she had to give up her job to look after her 2 children because they couldn't get the SEND support they needed in school. Another person said that they were struggling with addiction and they couldn't hold down a job because they couldn't get the support they needed from the NHS. So does she agree with me that whilst our work coaches are doing a really good job, ultimately we need to get our public services back on their feet, particularly the NHS?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I do agree with her, and can we just take this moment to thank the DWP team in St Albans, who sound like they're doing a great job, and also briefing their local MP, which is really good of them. And I would encourage all colleagues in the House to make sure they've got a regular catch-up with their job centre colleagues to make sure that they know the kind of things that work coaches are dealing with, and often members of Parliament can be quite helpful in putting people in touch with other organisations. So I would encourage all colleagues to do as she has done. On the point that she makes, on SEND, she's absolutely right. This is a major barrier. If you really want to understand what a struggle to get to work and to stay in work looks like, ask the parent of a disabled child. And we're thinking about this particularly through the Child Poverty Task Force, where the effect of poverty and the SEND crisis can often compound itself. So she's absolutely right. Good public services and a good, strong economy go hand in hand. It's not public services or a strong economy. That we called that ideology austerity, and it didn't work. It's the two going hand in hand. So we need to look in that rounded way as to how we can help people. And this is the approach that we are taking. We want to make every job centre in the country a place that people who are looking for work and employers will actually want to use. We know what happens early on in your career echoes down the years, and as I've said, our young people, the pandemic generation, were failed, and that's why our youth guarantee will give every 18 to 21-year-old access to quality education, training or employment. On top of this, we're working with local leaders who know their towns and cities best, supporting them to produce their own local Get Britain working plans that join up work, health and skills to support their communities. I mentioned before the major fractures that there still are in the UK economy given previous economic events that weren't managed properly, and that's why we know that the same thing just won't work everywhere, and DWP will reform itself so that we're able to localise support services and work with local leaders to do that. All of this will make sure that we help people enjoy the benefits to well-being that good work provides. And I do mean good work. The choice should never be in this country the scar of unemployment or the scar of poor work that does nothing but keep people poor. Poor work doesn't reduce the pressure on our social security system. It just means more people working too hard for their poverty. And that's why we will improve the security and quality of work through our plan to make work pay. Yeah. We will create more good jobs in every part of the country with a modern industrial strategy and local growth plans. And together this will help meet our long-term ambition for an 80% employment rate. We will create the conditions for success in social security. As I've already outlined, the changes that have been made to social security itself were ill thought through. So a fresh approach is needed to make our social security system more sustainable. And we will build that system in order to give people the help they need to find great jobs and make sure they actually feel the benefit of work. We want to tackle poverty and target support at those who need it most. And we will set out our proposals in a green paper on reforming the health and disability system in the spring. We will work with disabled people and their organisations to get this right. Because a strong social security system needs to have the confidence of us all, anyone might find ourselves suddenly unwell with the extra costs that children bring, and we all hope one day to enjoy the benefits of the state pension. So we must protect the social security system now and in the future. Not only did we confirm at the autumn budget last year that we would keep a welfare cap in place with a margin of 5% to account for the volatility of recent forecasts, but later this year we'll also publish a new annual report on social security spending across government, which sets out the DWP's plan to ensure it is on a sustainable path. Because the days of setting spending targets without a proper plan to meet them are over. I'll give way to them.
And on this point, does that mean that in a report that's produced next year, which may well recommend an increase in welfare spending, that would be impossible within this cap, or she would come back to Parliament and ask for a change in the cap well ahead of the 2029 expiration of this particular cap we're debating today?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It means that we will, on the specifics of our proposal, we'll publish a green paper on health and disability this year, in the coming months. And it means that with regards to the financial controls, that we will do all that the Chief Secretary to the Treasury set out just some moments ago in allowing the OBR to perform their function, as that is the best way to make sure that we take fiscal decisions within the guardrails that the Chief Secretary set out. So the results of the 14 years of failure, as I said earlier, are unfortunately only too obvious. Everywhere you look in this country right now, you can see the impact of what the last government did. Too many people in far too many places who were just neglected and failed. They were starved of opportunity and left to turn to a social security system that just isn't working, and everybody in this country pays the consequences.
Will she give way?
I will give way.
Along the right honourable member's got left in her speech, but I had a question around the welfare cap. We've been asked to make two decisions here, both to approve a welfare cap and to note the breach, basically. She's made a case for how they're trying to get Britain working. She's made the case for why the breach has happened this year. She's so far not made a case for why they're putting in a welfare cap this year and why we should, as parliamentarians, agree to that welfare cap that she's asking us to approve today.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the honourable lady for her question. I did make the case for the overall welfare cap and for that policy at the beginning of my speech because it is important that we have proper controls on public spending. Fantasy economics will do nothing, absolutely nothing, to support family finances, and we are determined as a government that we will manage public finances in a responsible fashion. As I said, the results of failure are only far too obvious. We all pay the consequences, and that's why we will not stand for it. Every penny counts, but so does the future of every person in this country. And that's why, in order to make sure that we save every penny for the things we want to spend it on in social security, we're bringing forward the biggest welfare fraud and error package in recent history. We are not just tweaking a broken system, we're going to fundamentally change the way we approach reform, starting with the principle of focusing on people. We will tackle the root causes of unemployment, whether you're out of work because you can't find a job or you're out of work because the last government wrote you off. Everybody deserves to build a better life and fulfil their potential.
I thank the Minister for giving way. I'm proud to be a Labour MP. Labour is the party of the dignity of work. We know that for those who are able to, the best place to be is in work with a well-paid job with good rights. Does she agree with me that the previous government did far too little to ensure that lots of people who could work were helped back into work so that they could get all of the benefits, the dignity that working can bring, and wrote off far too many people, which has left us in this sorry state?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm glad my honourable friend is proud to be a Labour MP, as am I, and I'm glad that he's proud. I'm glad that he's proud of the approach that we're taking on employment, because so am I. We cannot afford this failure anymore in the cost to our public finances, and we will never tolerate the failure in hope, dignity, ambition and opportunity that the levels of unemployment in this country now represent. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
The question is, as on the order paper, I call Shadow Minister Helen Whately.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The welfare cap we are debating today was introduced back in 2014 by the Conservative Chancellor at the time, George Osborne, to hold the government to account on the cost of our welfare system. Through the 2010s, we, in government, broadly kept to that cap. It was part of the discipline we applied to the welfare system to make it fair to the taxpayer and to put into practice the strongly held Conservative principle that if you can work, you should work. We introduced universal credit to make sure that work always pays. We supported businesses to create millions of jobs. And we helped thousands of people into work and drove down economic inactivity. Opposed every step of the way, I might add, by the party opposite. But, and I'm not going to shy away from telling the truth, in the last few years, during and since the pandemic, things changed. While the number of jobs kept going up, the number of people economically inactive also started to go up, and with that the welfare bill, and this is a big problem. It's a financial problem that means we're here today debating a welfare cap which has been breached. It's an economic problem because our economy needs the talents and energies of everyone, and it's a social problem. Of the 9 million people of working age defined as economically inactive, 2.8 million of them are not working because of ill health, and that includes growing numbers of young people starting out on a life on benefits instead of starting out on a career, missing out on the opportunities that work brings, the sense of purpose, the connections with other people, the chance to learn and develop skills, missing out on the experience of being paid for your efforts, and missing out on the chance to build financial independence and security. We, as a country, have a moral and financial imperative to turn this around, and in government, we were working flat out to tackle it. I'm happy to give way to the honourable gentleman.
The honourable lady for giving way. Would she acknowledge that under the last Conservative government, the inactivity rates among the young were the highest in the OECD? You were working on it, but it wasn't working.
Well, as I'm sure the honourable gentleman has heard, I was just acknowledging the fact that the economic inactivity rate started going up in the run into and following particularly the pandemic, and there's a particular concern that we have, and I'm sure the government shares, on growing inactivity among young people, and it's a challenge that we are experiencing more than other countries, and there's a lot of work to do to really get to the bottom of that. It was work that I was involved in government as a health minister, and I think it's imperative that the new government gets a grip of this as well. In government, I will just make some progress. In government, we were working flat out to tackle this problem. We were changing how we assess people's capability for work, recognising that the world of work has changed. We developed Work Well to help people with health conditions or disabilities find and stay in work. And we were reforming the fit notes that GPs give people. Once again, we were opposed every step of the way by the party opposite. We also had plans to go further. In our manifesto, we committed to 12 billion of savings by reforming sickness benefits. Labour responded at the time by saying the money simply isn't there, and the now Chancellor said that not a single penny could be saved from welfare. It turns out this one time, Labour have stuck to their word. They have no plans to control welfare spending. Today, they're setting themselves a welfare cap which doesn't include a penny of savings at a staggering 195 billion by 2029-30, a 44% increase on this year's cap. In cash terms, that's more than our entire defence budget. And not content with not saving a single penny, they've given themselves a £10 billion buffer on top of that. And that lack of ambition is indeed terrifying. We believe, we know, money can and should be saved from the welfare bill. I should say, finally, the Chancellor now seems to agree with us because she has been busy briefing the papers in a panic about cutting spending. But where are those plans? Unfortunately, Madam Deputy Speaker, she hasn't actually got any. Because, as I said, until now, she didn't believe any savings could be made. But maybe the Employment Minister can give us some clues. I believe that she's canned my fit note reforms. So what is she going to do to get the welfare bill down, and when? And how on earth does she expect to get people into work when 50,000 people were added to the unemployment figures in December alone? I'm happy to give way to the Honourable Lady.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think I'm being asked whether or not we've stopped the extensive work that the last government was doing, seeing inactivity rising. And I have to say, when I got into the Department for Work and Pensions, there was not an extensive plan available. That's why we've had to embark on fundamental reform, which we set out in a white paper in November. And that's why we're bringing forward a green paper on health and disability reform very shortly. So this idea that somehow there was an instruction list left in the Department for Work and Pensions that we could just crack on with is, Madam Deputy Speaker, a fantasy.
Well, I'm sure the Honourable Lady knows, or I think she will know, that the vast majority of what she set out in the white paper was a continuation of things that we were doing in government. In fact, if she's read it, it even says that the Youth Guarantee is essentially a new name for repackaging an existing set of measures that were already in practice. That is literally in the white paper. I'm very happy to follow up with her afterwards on the page that she will find that phrase in. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm afraid I have yet to see a single sign to suggest that this government can tackle the welfare bill. And the cap they're setting today tells us that they themselves agree. We, on this side of the House, will support efforts to sensibly bring down welfare costs. We need a compassionate safety net, but that net should never become a trap. If the government doesn't get a grip of this problem, it puts our entire social contract at risk. I believe ministers opposite have finally twigged that action is required. There is, they say, a green paper on its way, and I urge the Honourable Lady to get on with it, because each month that passes sees thousands more drift out of work and into a life of inactivity.
Dr. Jeevun, Sandher.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Every person in this country should be able to live a decent life, but too many of us are unable to earn that decent wage, and that is what is pushing up social security spending and the motions that we are discussing today. Too many forced to claim sickness benefits because the NHS has failed them. There aren't enough well-paid jobs, and people do not engage with the social security system the party opposite left us because it demonised and attacked them. That has left us, as this incoming Labour government, with a choice. Implement massive cuts to social security in this year, or with a technical breach of the welfare cap. Madam Deputy Speaker, I am proud that this government has chosen to breach that cap rather than driving people into destitution. I am proud that we will get people who want to work into work, and I am proud that we will change the system for the future to ensure that people are not left as they were for the past 14 years. I am proud that this government will ensure that every person has the support they need when they need it. Our nation is sick, Madam Deputy Speaker, and things need to change. And specifically, 3 things need to change. Firstly, our NHS needs to shift. After 14 years of mismanagement, the disastrous Landsey reforms, we have almost 3 million people that are out of work. The only G7 nation to see sickness rise during the pandemic and after it as well. The kind of degradation and damage that we all see when every single one of us tries to get an appointment at our local GPs. That is what we need to fix in the years ahead. Secondly, transforming our low-pay, low-training economy, which does not provide enough good jobs or pay enough to live. Thousands unable to turn on the heating because they can't afford it. Thousands unable to eat, with nurses forced to go to food banks. Around 70% of those in poverty of children are in working family. And Madam Deputy Speaker, being cold, being hungry, it makes people sicker. And we have too many people in this country who go straight from school into sickness. The young people in this nation who are too sick, who have become inactive in the labour market, has almost doubled since 2013, and those are the parties and the problems that we are fixing in the years ahead. And thirdly, of course, the punitive social security system that pushed people to the brink. And so when people could not see their GP, when they could not earn a decent life, when they were too scared to go to the job centre, they stopped working altogether. And that has led us in this country to a toxic doom loop. Sicker people having less money in their pocket, becoming too sick to work, and need to higher social security payments today. The amount we are spending on social security is not a sign, indeed, of the last party's generosity. It is a sign and symbol of their failure. And that is what we are addressing in the year ahead. The amount that we are spending on sickness and disability benefits has risen from 42 billion in 2010 to 65 billion today, and that's in real terms, not in nominal terms. I could do the numbers in my head, but I think around 40 to 50% higher. And that is why we will breach the cap in this year by £8.6 billion, rather than imposing devastating and swingeing cuts to those who already cannot afford to eat. Because we know on this side of the House, Madam Deputy Speaker, that food banks are not an integral part of our welfare system. They are instead a sign and symbol of failure. That is the things that we must change in this future. But more, of course, than simply the changes to policy is also the changes to attitudes which we need to see. 14 years that said that every person who was failing to earn enough was somehow a skiver was wrong. And it drove those who needed to engage with the social security system to not engaging at all. I used to work at the Department for Work and Pensions, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I can tell you that people on both sides, those who want to work and those who want to help people to work, were good people let down by a bad system. And more damagingly, and yes, of course I will give way.
I thank him for giving way. I had somebody who works in my local job centre in Milton Keynes come and visit me last week and tell me about his experiences, where he currently has to take part in 10-minute appointments, a lot of that time spent on admin, and he's not been able to give the help and support he needs to people who are desperate to find a job. So do you think that it's actually really important that this government, unlike the previous government, focuses on actually putting in that support to get people to work, rather than just setting this narrative about the work-shy and people in this country who don't want to work, which isn't the truth?
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more with my honourable friend from Milton Keynes. 10 minutes is nowhere near enough for people to get the kind of job support they actually need. It's not enough for those who are seeking help. It's not those who are seeking to give help. It is enough training that they need. And especially as we're living in a country that is changing. An economy that means to get a well-paid job means that you need more training. A country that has changed from before the automotive revolution to now, of course, being the AI revolution. Those people need security, support and help that they are not guaranteed or given at the moment. And that is a precise moment, indeed, the intention of our changes that we are putting forward. And it is not easy to put those things forward. It will not take a short amount of time. But by starting that work today, we can ensure that those who need help do actually receive it. A changed relationship between those who are seeking to give and those who are receiving. But of course, this is not just about those who are on the ground, those who are doing the great work, and indeed my former colleagues, brilliant colleagues at the DWP. It's also about those of us in this House and about how we speak about those who need help, how we speak about those who are in poverty, about how we seek to speak about those who are on social security payments. Understand that every single person in this country does want to work, does want the dignity that comes to it, but too often are let down, either because of a lack of well-paying jobs, a lack of support, or indeed a lack of dignity afforded by a party that sought to only demonise them. And that is what we seek to change in this chamber, in this House, and indeed in this country. That is the choice before us today. And that is why we are making the decisions we are. A technical breach of the welfare cap in this year and a more accurate welfare cap in the years ahead, so we can begin to provide the support that people need. Of course.
One of the biggest reasons why people go to food banks is the fact that the work doesn't pay, and the fact that the two-child cap, for example, means that they don't have enough money to live on, they don't have enough money to support their families. Why is it supporting a welfare cap that bakes in the two-child limit?
I don't believe the honourable member is correct. The welfare cap does not define future decisions. The welfare cap in future years defines the total amount that will be spent at that time. So the welfare cap, we should care what it does and does not refer to. The honourable lady does speak about the two-child limit in particular, and as we have been clear on this side of the House, there are choices that have to be made in tight and straightened times. We know the children that are driven into poverty. We know that no child deserves the circumstance to which they are born, and we know indeed the huge and shocking rise in child poverty and child hunger in this country. I know members across this House are shocked by it. The truth is we cannot make every decision in this House. These are straitened times, but I do appreciate indeed the intervention, indeed the good faith place from which it came. There's a lot we have to change this country, and I'm sure we'll do so in the years ahead. So the choice before us today is simple. The technical breach in this year, the change in the years before. Those are the reasons we are making the right choices today and in the future. Many of those today who are in work cannot make it pay. And that is why we're going to make sure that people who are in work get the training that they need. And that's not just about the training they need to get a better job, but the support they need to ensure that their healthcare is good enough, or indeed their health is good enough to continue working. And more broadly than that, ensure that every single person in this country can have a decent job that pays enough. That is why we are taking 3 actions to do so. First and foremost, our actions on the NHS and through the Darcy Review, because we should not live in a country where almost 3 million people are too sick to work. That's why we offer thousands more appointments to get those waiting lists down, because people who can't see a GP today are far more likely to end up out of work tomorrow. Secondly, helping people get into work. The 16 Trailblazer programmes to join up work skills and health support. The £115 million to help those with complex needs get back into work. And thirdly, creating good jobs for young people with the Youth Guarantee, so every single young person in this country can access the training they need and the apprenticeships they require. The fundamental reforms that the Chancellor today also set out in her speech, supporting people into work so they can contribute to our economy, so they can also do what they need to do to get a decent life for themselves and their family. Having a decent job, earning enough to live, it's about more than the pound in your pocket. It's about a sense of contentment. It's about something to talk about with your mate. It gives meaning to each day. I will give way.
For giving away, and he's very eloquently talked about those challenges about people getting into the workplace. But I also realised that the large number of people that we have across our society who are actually economically inactive due to no fault of their own. But that desire to look for work, to look for welfare payments, to actually support them get into work, sometimes the system actually works against them to get out of that challenge that they don't face because of any fault of their own.
I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for his point, and indeed that is entirely the entire reason we are changing this system today. Yes, it's about the practical changes, providing more support, but on the other side, of course, it is about a change of tone and a change of attitude, and actually, frankly, treating people like they're human beings. That's exactly what we believe on this side of the House. That's the entire core of our support and our reforms in this country. Make sure every single person does have a decent job. It gives them meaning, it gives them something to talk about with their mates. It's something a previous Labour government did so well, and that's how we got poverty down in this country, Madam Deputy Speaker. A previous member for Sedgefield, a shining light for us on these benches, he promised to end child poverty in a generation. And a previous member for Dunfermline, a hero to us on these benches, put that into practice and reduced child poverty by almost 1 million. It is that Labour tradition to which I speak. It is that Labour tradition as to why I am proud to stand here today, and is those Labour traditions why I am proud to vote today in favour of these motions. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Years of mismanagement by the previous Conservative government damaged our economy, hit people's living standards and left our public services on their knees, especially our NHS and care. So it is no wonder that we've seen the welfare bill go up. The Conservatives left GP and hospital waiting times soaring, they saw staff vacancies spiralling, and local public health funding was slashed. The cancer treatment target was missed every year since 2015. They promised 6,000 GPs and left government with fewer of them. The 40 new hospitals, of course, fell apart, in some cases literally, leading to inefficiencies in our health service as staff and patients battled cramped and crumbling buildings. And I remember a former Conservative Prime Minister standing on the steps of Number 10, promising to fix social care once and for all. But as we know, millions of people around the UK are left to pick up the pieces of a broken social care system. This disgraceful legacy and the blatant mismanagement of our economy has left millions of people unable to work due to long-term illness and having to rely on support instead, impacting growth and productivity. Under the last Conservative government, the number of people not looking for work, especially due to ill health, reached record levels, and government spending on welfare went up drastically as a result. It is their mismanagement that has left so many people unable to seek work and relying instead on government support. Madam Deputy Speaker, we Liberal Democrats have always understood that a healthy economy requires healthy people. As I've said a number of times in this House, health and wealth are two sides of the same coin. The best way to bring down welfare spending is for the government to act with urgency and ambition to end the crisis in our NHS and care, empowering people to join the workforce and reducing the need for welfare support in the first place. Now, the Conservatives' mismanagement of the economy has had a direct impact on decisions being made today. At informal assessments in 2020, 2021 and 2023, the OBR clearly said that the welfare cap was on track to be breached this year. But the new Labour government must do far more to fix our health and care services so fewer people require government support in the first place. And I have to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, I do think the Conservative Party has lost every right to criticise the current situation when their fingerprints of failure are all over it. We've discussed in this House before the impact of the government's national insurance contribution rise and other changes. The government has said repeatedly that these changes are inevitable as a way to fund the NHS. But the government knows, and we know, that some of this is really not needed. The national insurance contribution rise is going to impact our GPs, our dentists, our public health providers, primary care provision, pharmacists, social care providers, hospices, the list goes on. These are the people, these are the businesses that are propping up our NHS. And so I use this opportunity once again to encourage the government to reverse their increase in the national insurance contribution rise and look to other means of raising those funds. But fundamentally, Madam Deputy Speaker, we know that the best way to bring down the welfare spending is for the government to act with urgency and ambition to end the crisis in our NHS and social care. We Liberal Democrats made that our number one priority during the general election, and with now 72 MPs, it remains our number one priority in this House. Thank you.
David Pinto-Duschinsky.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I want to start by thanking my honourable friend for her statement. It's timely that this debate occurs on a day where the government's just laid out its bold and striking ambitions to grow our economy and take the tough decisions needed after years of dither and delay by the party opposite. Yeah. And I think today, more than many other days, we've seen laid out in stark relief the choice before us between doubling down on the failures of more of the same or picking a new route. And that's so much what today's debate is about. Now, I'd like to talk about the root causes of some of the issues we're facing, very much on that theme of growth. But firstly, I want to start by focusing on a number. 8.6 billion. That's how much their failures caused us to breach the welfare cap, time after time after time. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, that's not a small amount. Just to put it in some kind of context, that is as much as the entire programme budget of the Department of Work and Pensions. If you want another comparison, it's half the entire police grant for all policing in England and Wales. It is a phenomenal failure on the part of the party opposite that we stand facing this issue today. And it's not their only failure in DWP. My honourable friend, the Minister, has laid out fantastically well the litany of their failures. I'd like to pick up one in particular, because, of course, they've breached the welfare cap, but we haven't even had much time to talk about their failures on fraud and error. On their watch, and because of their failures, their numbers more than doubled. What's more, it's now been stuck at an elevated post-COVID rate. They left us with an entrenched fraud and error problem. And we could go on. The litany of catastrophic mismanagement is almost endless. And she said, a member opposite said, she could make savings. Well, they had 14 years. Where are they? What we got instead was lots of dog-ate-my-homework excuses. They should be hanging their heads in shame. And as my honourable friends have pointed out, it is telling that behind their shadowed ministers, their benches are empty, because they know how badly they've let the country down. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's not just about the 8.6 billion, because their failures shine a spotlight on two deeper failures that lie at the root causes of what bring us here today. A failure to grow the economy and a failure to get people into work and help people with health conditions move on in the labour market. Let me turn to growth first. Now, we've heard a lot today about the economy, but I think it's worth pausing for a moment just to remember how bad things were under the party opposite. On their watch, the economy grew since 2019 slower than any other G7 economy bar one. In the last decade of their rule, GDP only rose in real terms by GDP per capita by 6%. GDP by 6%. If we'd been growing at the same rate as other comparable countries, we would on average be over £8,000 each better off. And thanks to their mismanagement, we were on a trajectory to be overtaken on a GDP per capita basis by Poland before 2030. It is absolutely shameful. And I welcome that after years of this country being held back by the previous incompetent government, that we are finally taking the decisions to realise our country's potential. And that is what we heard today. £78 billion being released through supporting the Oxfam ARC. £160 billion through the Chancellor's excellent announcements over the weekend to allow investment of pension surpluses. £7.9 billion of infrastructure spend to give us 9 new reservoirs. They had 14 years. Do you know how many reservoirs they built, Madam Deputy Speaker? 0. That is the difference. And I am proud, Madam Deputy Speaker, of our Chancellor, who made the tough decisions that have given us the foundation of stability that have allowed us to make these announcements today. It's because of the stability that the budget and her other decisions have made that we have inflation now of 2.5%, that interest rates have been cut twice because the bank has confidence in the government's fiscal management, that investment is at a 19-year high, and that wages are growing at their fastest level in 3 years. Again, I could go on, but it's only because of the tough decisions that we've made that we are in that position. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, beyond their failure about growth, the breaches of the welfare cap also point and shine a spotlight on their terrible failure to get people into work and combat poverty. The figures are extraordinarily stark, and I'd like to thank the member for Loughborough for sharing some of them. But today, 1 in 5 adults are economically inactive because of their legacy. We are the only G7 country where employment rates remain below the pre-COVID level. And I note that when asked, the member opposite acknowledged the fact, but couldn't tell us why that is. Well, I have a clue for her. It is because of the incompetence and the failures of the party opposite. What's more, we know that these problems are driven overwhelmingly by ill health. 85% of those who dropped out of the labour market have done so due to ill health. And this is hitting disproportionately not only those over 50, but scandalously the youngest in our society. The number of NEETs, those not in education, employment or training, have gone up by a third under their watch in the last 3 years of their government. And what's more, it goes deeper than that, Madam Deputy Speaker, because beneath the shocking rise in 16 to 24-year-olds out of work and inactive, a stunning 79% of them are also low-skilled, with skill levels less than GCSEs. Because of their failures, so many of our young people have been caught in a downward spiral of low skills, poor opportunity, low self-esteem, and poor mental health. And this failure by the party opposite is a moral disgrace, but it's also a massive economic problem. If not addressed, the sickness bill that they bequeath the country could exceed £100 billion by the end of this Parliament. And I would like to say this is the first time they've done something like this. But it wouldn't be true, Madam Deputy Speaker, because those of us old enough to remember will know that in 1997, the previous Conservative government bequeathed over 5.1 million inactive people to the incoming Labour government. It is what Conservative governments do. Now, my right honourable friend has also mentioned the fact that so many of the technical changes they made to the universal credit and to other benefits actually dragged people further away from the labour market, putting up barriers, making it harder to get work. And this is an absolute scandal, especially because especially because we know that the staff of DWP, the people who work on this, want to make a difference. I worked for the New Deal Task Force 26 years ago, working on the last Labour government's strong efforts to get people back into work. I know DWP staff, they want to make a difference, but because of the last government's terrible policy design and incompetence, they are often prevented from doing so. And this is a massive human tragedy. We know from survey work that at least half of the people who are inactive, 4.5 million people, say they want to work if there can be the right support. And we also know that for many of the issues that those who are inactive face, work is the best tonic. We know, for instance, from a study from Cambridge University, that just 8 hours a week of paid work can reduce mental health issues in a large portion of the population by up to 30%. And what's more, the party opposite did far too little to tackle the underlying dynamics of low work and no work that so many people in poverty face. We know the average family in poverty goes through up to 7 separate spells in poverty. All too often, it is like the Hotel California. They can check out, but they can never leave. But rather than trying to deal with that problem, all we got from the party opposite was sticking plasters and political slogans. Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I am incredibly proud to sit on the government benches supporting a government that's going to take a different approach, that is absolutely determined to make an actual difference and tackle the root causes. We've heard from the Minister the action that's going to be taken to give people, our young people choice through the Youth Guarantee between earning and learning, a real, proper, stable start in life. We've heard about the changes that we're going to make to DWP to actually get it working. We've heard about the changes that will actually tackle the barriers to work, real practical steps rather than the slogans of the party opposite. We've heard about the work that's going to happen on fraud and error so that our public money is being spent helping people get back on work rather than leaking out of the system. And we've heard about the efforts that will be made to not just get people into jobs, but into good jobs. And I think it's worth pausing on this for a second, because the labour market has changed a lot in the last 30 years. It is no longer a given that all jobs give you a ladder to good, fulfilling, family-supporting work. And for too long, the party opposite, when they were in government, ignored this. And it is such good news that both through the work on good work, as my honourable friend laid out through the industrial strategy, but also through the work bringing together the careers service with Job Centre Plus, so that we have a system that doesn't just focus on getting people into work, but helping them get on. We finally have a government that is taking that problem seriously. Now, our ambition is no less than to give people proper power over their own lives. As my honourable friend from Loughborough pointed out, so often when they were in government, the party opposite just sought to demonise and sloganise. We're trying to put power back in people's hands and give them real power over their own lives that only fulfilling, decent work can offer. Now, when I started work, I worked, as I said, in the New Deal Task Force on the New Deal in what was DWP's predecessor department. I was then lucky enough later on to work on similar issues in the Prime Minister's Strategy Unit. And what characterised the administration then was a real passion to change lives, a real passion to make things better. It's been so lacking for the last 14 years, and it is so refreshing to hear that it is back. And I am absolutely proud to stand here and support this motion. Thank you.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'm pleased we're having this debate, and I'm sorry it is a relatively short one. My concerns about the proposal that's put before us are that, on the one hand, it recognises an overspend on the welfare cap, which I understand and support that we should be allowed to overshoot the cap. My concern is that what it does is hardwires into decisions for the next 5 years on welfare spending, and therefore any change in the welfare cap, any change in welfare, any element of welfare spending in the future will be restricted because of this. The cap does not include pensions and work-related benefits. What it does include particularly is disability, housing benefit and PIP payments. And those are the areas where there seems to me to be often the greatest levels of poverty and the greatest levels of problems that people face in simply trying to survive. The government has already removed the winter fuel allowance, and that is included in the estimates for the next 5 years, and is maintaining the two-child benefit cap, which restricts the amount of money paid on benefits to families. And whilst I understand all the points the member for Loughborough made and the passion with which he made them, the reality is that by not removing this ridiculous cap that was put on by the member for Chingford when he was the Secretary of State, we do have a lot of children living in desperate poverty. Any member that goes to a food bank, and we all have food banks in our constituencies, talk to the people that are there, talk to the parents that are there picking up food, and you will find a wholly disproportionate number, usually of mothers, of children in very large families who cannot make ends meet because they only get benefits for the first two children. We need to get rid of this two-child benefit cap. And what we're invited to support today actually ensures that we do keep that cap there. We maintain the removal of the winter fuel allowance, and we box ourselves in on what we can do on improving both the take-up and the availability of disability benefits as a whole. And so I would caution the Minister's optimism in all this. Whilst I recognise the need to overshoot the cap today, and I fully understand that, because I can understand why it's come about, we do need to look at the levels of poverty within our society. Now, I understand all the points that have been made about the role of the DWP in people seeking work. I understand that. I was a member of the Bill Committee in 1986, which took a sledgehammer to the then existing Department of Social Security's methods of supporting people out of work and helping people into work. We've suffered from that ever since, and I'm pleased that the DWP is reforming its ways of doing things and will help people with more advice and more support of getting into work. But the reality is there are many people in this country that do suffer because of the mental health crisis that we're in, have suffered industrial injuries, are living in great poverty, do need support. And surely we should be measuring the levels of poverty, measuring the levels of increased child poverty that exist within our society, and the underachievement of those children living in poverty in schools and education, rather than saying the most important thing to do is limit the level of welfare spending. There is a reason for it. I meet many people in my constituency and other places who are in receipt of DWP benefits. Some of them are in work, some are unemployed, and some have sickness problems and cannot work. They're not shirkers, they're not skivers, they're people that need help within our society. We've had too long of the blame culture against anyone that tries to seek help within the law through our benefit system. And I would hope that there will be a reply from the government on this, that they do accept there needs to be a re-examination of the levels of poverty within our society and a preparedness to change the welfare cap in the future to accommodate any increased needs that come about as a result of it. Because the thinking behind this wasn't one of eliminating poverty within our society. The thinking behind this was all about limiting the level of welfare payments and what people benefit from it. And in an intervention in the earlier debate, I pointed out to the Financial Secretary to the Treasury that huge infrastructure projects have gone massively over budget and been financed. I support the Elizabeth line, it's a wonderful thing, but it was way over budget. There's plenty of other projects way over budget. So there seems to be a different approach taken to investment in major infrastructure projects that run way over budget. Yet, when it comes to a welfare budget, anything that goes over is going to be prevented by the Treasury from going over. And so we cannot predict who's going to be injured next year. We cannot predict what illnesses are going to come. We cannot predict what needs are going to become. Surely, the welfare state principle has to be that we support people when they need that help and that support. And yes, help them to be available and get back into work, and say to employers, you need more flexible working arrangements so that people can work part-time and all the other things, and you need to look at the levels of unemployment amongst people with disabilities who simply cannot get work because the employment laws are not strong enough on employers providing work for those people with disabilities, but nevertheless are well able to work. And so I think we should be more cautious than this sort of rather gung-ho approach of saying, we are cracking down on welfare. I want to crack down on poverty. I want to crack down on unemployment. I want to crack down on people who are prevented from achieving the best they can in their lives and in our society.
Yeah. John McDonnell.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I do hope that the government will consider completely scrapping this debate in future years, because it's become farcical, really. The honourable gentleman will remember, who just spoke, will remember, the reason this, the welfare cap was introduced was the Dutch auction that was going on within this chamber about who could be more brutal on the poor, basically. And so the welfare cap was part of that period of debate where anyone claiming benefit was allegedly a welfare benefit scrounger and was not willing to work for a living. And that was the atmosphere that was engendered in this chamber. And at that stage, to be frank, it was deeply worrying. And in many ways, humanity almost left the chamber itself. And then the farcical nature of it is that, having introduced the cap, minister after minister each year would have to come back and basically report that the cap had been breached because more expenditure had been forced upon the government as a result of the increasing levels of poverty. I suppose the only benefit it does give the opportunity of members at least having some discussion about poverty. Can I just suggest to the Labour front bench that remove the cap because it does become a farcical exercise. But if we are to have a debate on poverty, it's around an annual report from the Labour government on the poverty strategy that it's now developing. I believe the committee, or the commission established by the Labour Party is now working. It would be so much better if we had that report and that we didn't have this, as I say, farcical pantomime that we have today.
Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the honourable gentleman for allowing me to intervene briefly, just to say that the Child Poverty Task Force work is ongoing and that it regularly engages with parliamentarians and others to update them on the work. And I know many parliamentarians have been pleased to involve themselves in that work, given the importance of tackling child poverty.
John McDonnell.
That's a really helpful response, but it doesn't respond to the fact that actually if we are going to have a focus on poverty, rather than have this, as I say, this debate on a welfare cap that isn't a cap and actually is breached on a virtually annual basis, it might be better having an overall debate on the government's strategy to tackle poverty overall, and then we could have a proper discussion and even a debate with a motion that could be amended where we want to see improvements. And that's where I want to get onto now, really, because people have seen, I hope, the Joseph Rowntree report today on poverty overall, and it reflects basically what most of us know and experience in our own constituencies. And it's shatteringly depressing, to be frank, because it hasn't shown any improvement literally in the last decades or so. The Honourable Lady opposite from the front bench mentioned the issue about when the government came into power, the Tory government came into power and it introduced this measure. It was during that period of austerity, and I think it is worth reflecting on what that meant. The LSE's report actually identified, and others have done independent reports as well, as a result of that austerity, 140,000 people losing their lives. Others have estimated up to 300,000, and it was because, in part, the grinding poverty that was imposed upon them, and we reflected it in all our constituencies. We saw it. I remember a time when there were no food banks that we were aware of in any of our constituencies because they weren't actually necessary. But now they are as a result of 14 years of austerity. If we are going to have a proper debate around poverty, I think we just need to highlight as individual constituency MPs where we think the government should be going. So I just want to briefly do that on the basis of what we've seen in the Joseph Rowntree report as well. The overall figures I always cite, we've got 15 million people living in poverty, 5 million children. On the Joseph Rowntree report today, it's 4 million. Actually, no, I think it's 4 million overall in deep poverty, nearly 4 million in destitution, and the one that always shocks me is 1 million children in destitution. I actually never thought we'd use that word again within our society. I always thought we'd be on a basis of improving year by year and lifting people out of poverty. I never thought children would live in poverty in the way that some of my generation did at that stage. But there's groups that I think need to be clearly on the agenda. My honourable friend on the front bench has mentioned some of them, thank goodness. I chair a group of unpaid carers. There are 5 million within this country. If you're an unpaid carer looking after a disabled member of your family, it's almost inevitable that you're living in poverty. And unless we face up to the central demand of unpaid carers, which is addressing their income, and it isn't just about, as the government has done recently, how much they can earn, it is about the carers' allowance being at such a level that people can't survive on it. I have to say also, if we look at the report with regard to the families with children living in poverty, at the moment, I can't see anything fast enough to get children out of poverty than scrapping the 2-child limit. And I'm hoping that will be on the agenda as a priority when the child poverty group reports very quickly to Parliament overall. In terms of disabled people, in the report, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation now has identified that the poverty rate amongst disabled people is 30%. The government now is about to consult again on the work capability assessment reforms. And the reason it's consulting again is because it lost in court to Ellen Clifford 2 weeks ago. I'm pleased the government did lose in court, to be frank, but that was on the basis of the lack of consultation over the past government's reforms. I don't understand why our own government continued the appeal within the court, but nevertheless it did. They've now lost. They're forced to bring forward their consultations with regard to the reforms of the work capability assessment. I'm hoping that those reforms will be done on co-production with disabled people. In other words, on the principle of the disability groups of nothing about us without us. My fear is that there's an overhanging £3 billion worth of savings that's required from the DWP on this particular issue. And if that results in cuts to individual benefits, I think there'll be uproar within our communities and across this House as well. What's interesting from the Joseph Rowntree report as well is the issue on the number of the people who are suffering long-term health conditions. Their poverty rate is 50%. And that's why some of the work that our health department will now do with regard to, we talked about the walk-in advice surgeries and things like that. The issue about the focus on mental health is absolutely key. Finally, from me, I have to say the household benefit cap overall is, I think, iniquitous in itself. It's forcing, particularly in places like London, it forces families into poverty because of the high rents that are hitting people. But on the Joseph Rowntree report, renters in social housing, 44% poverty rate. In private rented, 35% poverty rate. And I have to say the government's refusal to introduce rent controls and the amendment for rent controls that were brought forward by a number of our colleagues on this side was extremely disappointing. And I thought at least what the government could do is devolve the power to the mayors, individual mayors, so that they can represent their communities and introduce rent controls where necessary. And I believe Sadiq Khan has expressed his support for that power to be devolved, and as a result of that we can tackle some of the housing crisis that we face with our constituencies. I just think when we talk about poverty we need to come forward with an agenda that will tackle it, but tackle it at pace. And I don't think in our discussions or debates in the future a welfare benefits cap in any form will assist that debate and bring forward those reforms that our constituents so desperately need.
Kirsty Blackman.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I agree with a number of the comments that have been made across the House today. I found myself nodding along with a member from Hayes and Harlington there, and particularly with the member from Islington North in relation to the comments that were being made there. Just to highlight a couple of things before I go into some of the meat of my speech. In terms of universal credit claimants, 38% of universal credit claimants are in work. So I'm really glad the government is talking about how to make work pay. I'm really glad the government is talking about how to get more people into work. I'm really glad the government is investing, actually, in both strategies that will get young people into work, but also that will get people that have been longer term unemployed, for example, or even short term unemployed, back into work. I'm glad they're reforming job centres so that job centres will be making those, assisting people in the way that they maybe haven't been assisting people in recent times. I'm really pleased about all of that, but we do need to recognise that 38% of those who are on universal credit are already working. It's just that that work is not paying them enough, it's not offering flexible enough hours, that they've got childcare or other caring commitments around that, and therefore they need that top-up. Therefore that top-up has to be in place. So it is not just the social security system. The welfare cap does not just cover those benefits, those social security things that are provided to people that are out of work. It covers, for example, child benefit. It covers a huge number of different things. So it is not entirely focused on people who are out of work, although I do appreciate the government's actions in this. I think that this is a bit backwards. The member from Islington North was talking about this. If we were, Madam Deputy Speaker, to say, what we're going to do is we are going to put a cap on the number of people and the amount of spend that there can be on chemotherapy. We are going to put a cap on it, right? If we were to do that, it's okay to put a cap on it, right? If we were to say it's okay to put a cap on it because we're going to reduce the numbers of people smoking, we're going to reduce the risk factors, we're going to reduce obesity, we're going to have a healthier population. So it's okay for us to cap chemotherapy because we're going to put all this stuff in place in order to ensure that we will reduce the spend that we need to make on chemotherapy. Everybody would be jumping up and down and saying that's backwards. First spend the money, first solve the problem, and then the spend will reduce. That's the whole point about this welfare cap. It's backwards. They're putting in a welfare cap. They're trying to say that we're going to reduce the spend on welfare by doing all these things that they're not doing yet. They haven't solved the problem. Once you've solved the problem, once the welfare system has improved in the way that the government is trying to improve it, then the system, the numbers will reduce, the spend will reduce. However, I'm not convinced entirely that everything that the government is putting in place will reduce the spend, because they're battling against a number of different factors here. Even if they do manage to get jobs to pay better, even if they do increase the minimum wage further so it's closer towards a living wage, and even if they do ensure that there are more opportunities, even if the Chancellor's opportunities for growth exist and create many, many more jobs, there is still a significant number of people who the system is not set up to support. There are people that I have dealt with in my constituency surgeries that are being supported by third sector organisations, for example. Third sector organisations that are being hammered by the national insurance changes and will not be able to provide that support that they've been providing. There are individuals who are 6 months away from being able to get up at 8 o'clock every morning, to being able to have that level of consistency within their lives. And my concern is that governments, all governments, I'm not specifically blaming the Labour government on this, are looking for quick wins. It's like, where's the low-hanging fruit? Where can we try and improve things so that a number of people who are pretty close to work anyway, who are not that far out of, who have got pretty stable lives, who don't have that incredibly chaotic lifestyles, so that they can get access to work. But the people that do have those chaotic lifestyles, the people that are so far away from that ability to claim work, to get into paying work, particularly full-time paying work, if we reduce the amount of disability benefits that they can claim, if we reduce the amount of support that they can get when they are a year away from having a stable enough situation to be able to access work, then we're letting those people down. The social security safety net is not acting as a safety net unless it provides that support for those people that absolutely cannot work right now, will take 12, 15, 18, 2 months, 2 years of intensive support to get them to a position where they can achieve part-time work. And I don't think that support is in place. I don't think any government has supported enough of that to ensure that people can not be left on that scrap heap.
Never give way.
Yeah.
No, I thank the member for her contribution. And it used to be, we talk about labelling people in here. There used to be that awful acronym of NEETs. Those young people's not in education, employment or training, and thank goodness we've moved away from that. But the member talks about those programmes, and it's the programmes we used to have in Northern Ireland, European Social Fund, UK Prosperity Fund, that we're now seeing those funds being withdrawn from those communities, those organisations that were so crucial about getting those who were so far away from employment actually into gainful employment. And it takes time. It takes time to build the confidence of those young people up, to build the confidence in their societies, to actually trust, to see the value of work and input. So I think I agree with the member in regards to, but this is a long-term plan, but we're looking for short-term ones.
It is absolutely a long-term plan, and that's why I'm making the case that we can't have a welfare cap, that it's being done backwards. We should be putting in all of the supports that the government is promising to put in. We should be putting in more than the supports that the government is promising to put in, and getting people to a position where they can get into work. But the welfare cap, I think, is just an unfortunate hurdle in the way, particularly when it does bake in some of the cuts that are being made. It bakes in the winter fuel payment cut. It assumes that there's not going to be an increase in paternity pay levels, for example. It'd be quite nice to see an increase in paternity pay levels. It'd be quite nice to see an increase in men taking up paternity leave. But in terms of the young people not in education, employment, training, that phrase was actually used earlier, because someone used the word NEET in the chamber earlier on. And it would be great if young people did have more chances and more choices. And the last thing I wanted to cover was in relation to geographical issues, in relation to the Minister mentioned Blackpool, for example, in relation to those issues that there are in specific geographical locations. Now, I'm the member for Aberdeen North. You would not expect me to avoid talking about Aberdeen in debates such as this. It is so important that we have a just transition. And in terms of doing things backwards, the Minister needs to ensure that we build up those renewable energy jobs before we knock down the jobs in fossil fuel. And I'm really concerned that the government is failing to do this in the right order, and we're going to have a gap where people become unemployed because of the UK government's actions.
Dan Tomlinson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you to the Secretary of State for all the work on these very important issues. I'm aware we're close to the end of this debate, so let me just raise one issue which was raised to me by a small business owner in my constituency of Shipping Barnet in North London, which is the way that the Job Centre failed to support people into work for so long when the previous government were in charge. It's very encouraging to see what's coming forward in the White Paper, because, Madam Deputy Speaker, my small business owner, Simon, his name is, spoke of how he advertised some jobs in his company. He spent 7 hours, him and his team, going through lots of interviews with 80 applicants, all of whom were from the Job Centre, none of whom had any desire to take up the job and were just applying because they were being forced to do so by the work coaches in the job centres in those 10-minute appointments. And I'm very happy that the government is working with the White Paper, and there'll be more to come in the Green Paper soon, so that we can help people who want to work find the jobs that are right for them and help employers get good matches to increase our productivity and increase growth in this country.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. With the leave of the House, I'd like to thank every member who's contributed to this debate. The members for Loughborough, Hendon, St Albans, Aberdeen North, Hayes and Harlington and Chipping Barnet all have made important contributions, and I thank them for it. All of us have pointed out that our social security system should be a safety net and a springboard and should help people be and do all of the things that they might wish. But when you look at what we've inherited, it is a mess and it does not serve the purpose it is supposed to. And that is such a crisis for this country, because for each and every one of us who knows that one day it could be us that got sick and needed help, or hopefully one day wants to be able to rely on the state pension. We need the social security system to do its job. So we are not in a good place, but we will move on. And we are all impatient to get the change that we need to do. We've already set out plans that have been discussed. We need big fundamental reform because the scale of the challenge is huge. £8.6 billion breach this year, and a breach that the OBR saw coming for over 18 months, but the previous government did absolutely nothing to prevent. And that is not a number that you get to because of one or two...
Order. Under the order of today, I must now put the question on the first motion. The question is, as on the order paper, as many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Aye. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. I call the Minister to move the second welfare cap motion formally.
Formally, Madam Deputy Speaker.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no.
Aye.
I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.